everyone, welcome to another MasterChaotix video. Today we will be discussing Sonic the Hedgehog and his history from 1991 to 2024. Let's get started. So the year is 1989. A gaming company called Nintendo has ruled the entire video gaming market, thanks to some games like Super Mario, The Legend of Zelda, Metroid, Donkey Kong, Kirby, and Mega Man. But a company called Sega released its powerful 16-bit console called the Genesis, or Mega Drive in Japan or Europe. Sega didn't really have a mascot for the Genesis, so they made a character called Sonic and started developing a game for him by Yuji Naka and Tom Kalinske. After months of development, the first Sonic game is released on June 23rd, 1991. It was about a hedgehog with red shoes who tried to rescue his animal friends from Dr. Eggman. Sonic's first game wasn't an immediate success. However, after a while, a lot of people were into Sonic and they wanted sequels, and the first was in 1992 with Sonic 2. It introduced a sidekick named Tails and the spin dash move. In 1993, Sonic CD was released for the Sega CD and introduced the characters Amy Rose and Metal Sonic. Also in 1993, Sega started making comic books and a couple of cartoon shows like Adventures of Sonic and Sonic Saturn. And in 1994, Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles was released and introduced another new character named Knuckles. But Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles were not originally meant to be separate games. They were supposed to be one big game, but due to some problems, they were split up into two games. For Sonic 3 had a McDonald's promotion, and the other half had Sonic and Knuckles had lock-on technology, which means that if you put Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles together, it becomes one game, Sonic 3 and Knuckles. And if you put Sonic 2 cartridge in, you can play as Knuckles in the game, but you can play as him in Sonic 1 instead. You are taken to the Blue Sphere minigame. Now at this point, Sonic is the king of the gaming world, and he had a lot of spin-offs games released for the Game Gear. 1996 was a really awkward year because Sony was about to release their first console called the PlayStation with a new thing called CD-ROMs, changing the way games are made and sold. So Sega launched a 32-bit console called the Sega Saturn, which was released in Japan in November of 1994 and the US in May of 1995. But the Sega Saturn didn't do well because it costed $399, and it had a competition from the PlayStation, which was $100 less than the Saturn. So Sega made some Sonic games to help the Sega Saturn. The first one was Sonic 3D Blast, released for the Genesis and the Sega Saturn in 1996. The game did well and sold 700 million copies worldwide, but had slippery controls and all the levels were mazed. The second Sonic game, Sonic Gem, which was released in July of 1997 for only the Sega Saturn only, not the Genesis. It was just a collection of Sonic's 1, 2, 3, and Knuckles, and the Blue Sphere minigame. It also had a Sonic world where you can explore, and somewhere in that world, you can see a Sonic short that is not named. And the last game was Sonic R on the Saturn in late 1997, which did well, but still had problems. So these games weren't able to beat the PlayStation. It even had some risky ad campaigns. And what I mean by risky It was adult targeted and inappropriate. I think that was a thing in 90s commercials. Anyway, the PlayStation even had its mascot called Crash Bandicoot, and Nintendo had launched their 64-bit console called the Nintendo 64, and it came with Mario 64. But Sega tried to make a Sonic game to beat those consoles, and it was called Sonic Extreme. The game was planned to be the first true Sonic game, but eventually the game was cancelled after several development issues, and Yuji Naka refused to make the game. So in 1998, Sega discontinued the Sega Saturn without a true Sonic game with it. Sega moved on to create their new console called the Dreamcast, and it was the first true 3D Sonic game, which was with it called Sonic Adventure. It was released on September 9th, 1999. Sonic Adventure was an action platformer that had the players Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Amy, E102, Gamma, and Big the Cat. The game was a huge hit and went on to become the best-selling game on the Dreamcast, selling over 2.5 million units. But Sega is still in trouble thanks to the Saturn's hardware and its risky ads. They also made a bunch of consoles like the 32X, and the console wasn't really popular or well received. In 2001, Sega had announced that they were discontinuing the Dreamcast and said that they would focus on software titles. That means that you can play Sonic games on Nintendo consoles, including some other gaming consoles. Sega also made handheld games for the Game Boy Advance, like the Sonic Advance series, Sonic Chronicles, Sonic Battle, and more. They also made Sonic games for home consoles like Sonic Heroes in 2003, which had team-based gameplay, and in 2005 there was Shadow the Hedgehog. It's a Sonic game with guns, adult language, and blood. I really like talking about this game. Moving on. So now we're at the worst year of Sonic history, 2006. It's a bad year for Sonic because that's the year when Sonic 06 was released for the PS3 and Xbox 360. And it was totally unfinished, and it is pretty recommended as one of the worst video games of all time. Anyway, at this point, it is the early 2010s, and Sega released some quality games like Sonic Colors, Sonic Generations, and Sonic Lost World. They also made Sonic mobile games like Sonic Dash and Team Sonic Racing. But in 2014, Sonic's worst game was released, and it was called Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric for the Wii U and Sonic Boom Shattered Crystal for the Nintendo 3DS, and Sonic Boom Fire and Ice released in 2015, also for the Nintendo 3DS. These games weren't successful because they had bugs, glitches, and problems. The two games also had a cartoon series simply named Sonic Boom in it, and the show premiered on Cartoon Network, also in 2014. It didn't really do so well. So 2014 and 2015 wasn't really a good moment for Sonic. However, in 2016, a show was held to celebrate Sonic's 25th anniversary. During the celebration, they had announced two new games. One was called Sonic Mania, which is on PC, which is on the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, PC, and the newly introduced Nintendo Switch. It was a fan-made game which brought back the classic Sonic gameplay, and it felt like it was a game from the early 1990s, which became one of the best Sonic games of the late 2010s. The other game called Sonic Forces was a modern Sonic game that was originally recommended to be a sequel to Sonic Generations, but instead it was a sequel to Sonic Mania. If you had watched the ending cutscene, you probably know what I mean. If a few years later, Sonic got his own movie called Sonic the Hedgehog to celebrate Sonic's 30th anniversary. In 2022, Sonic turned 31 years old, and they celebrated it with the Sonic 2 movie, Sonic Origins, Sonic Frontiers, and the recent Sonic cartoon, Sonic Prime. Last year, there was a reboot to Sonic Origins called Sonic Origins Plus. The game made Amy a playable character and had 12 Game Gear Sonic games. Later that year, there was another classic game called Sonic Superstars, which made people stop playing Sonic Mania forever. But it was around this time that Sega announced the Sonic 3 movie. This movie is set to come out in December of this year, and it got Sonic fans really excited. I mean, like, people are talking about it on YouTube and Twitter right now. Sonic the Hedgehog is one of the most biggest video game icons of the world. Even though he has suffered throughout the years, he is still best known for his successive games. The 2D ones are classics, and the 3D games aren't, except for the ones that are. Well, that's all the time I have for today. It's a catchphrase that I'm going to be saying in later videos. Bye!